All right, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. My name is Christine Lai, and I am the Executive Director and co-founder of Special Education Legal Fund. And for those of you who don't know about SELF, Special Education Legal Fund provides resources and knowledge to families in need with children in special education. This includes our legal assistance program, through which we provide grants of up to $5,000 for legal support to families in Connecticut and Westchester County. We also provide support to families and other agencies and nonprofits on the topic of special education through seminars like these, as well as Proyecto de Educación Especial, our special education curriculum for ESL, ELL families. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have this panel this evening with our distinguished guests moderated by Lara Damashek. And before I turn the panel over to Lara, who will be moderating this evening, just a little housekeeping. I'm going to read a disclaimer for everyone who's participating in the call as a guest. This webinar panel is presented for informational purposes only. This webinar is intended as a resource for families who are navigating the special education system in Connecticut and/or New York, and is not intended to provide legal support, advice, or assistance to any particular individual, nor is it intended to replace the advice and counsel of a qualified special education attorney. This webinar should not be construed as an endorsement by Special Education Legal Fund of any of the representatives or any of its representatives of any of the participating attorneys or advocates in the panel. For you webinar participants, this panel should be viewed as a public forum. Please do not ask questions specific to your child or your child's legal or educational situation in this forum. Please refrain from any comments that include identifiable information about your child, including their name, their grade, their school, or their school district. Please remember that your screen name may be visible to the participants in this panel, as well as the panelists and Special Education Legal Fund. This webinar is being recorded and may be distributed or shown at a later date at the discretion of Special Education Legal Fund. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Lara Damashek, who is a great partner for SELF, and one of the things that I'm so thankful of for Special Education Legal Fund for bringing Lara into my life. Lara is a board member of Special Education Legal Fund, as well as an advocate, a former SPED attorney, as well as teacher and parent of 2 children residing here in Greenwich, Connecticut. So Lara, it's all you.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I wish I could see you, but this is about as close as we're gonna get. So hi, everyone. I know some friends and familiar faces are probably out there. Hope everybody is doing well and is healthy. So I'm very proud to introduce our panelists this evening. I'm going to go in order of how they appear on the screen here. So first I'll start with Greg Cangiano, who I was fortunate enough to work with when I practiced at Regina Skyer's office in New York City. Greg is now a partner there. In New York City, he litigates on behalf of special education children, and Greg has been at the Skyer Law Firm since 2006. Greg has extensive experience participating in IEP meetings and impartial hearings for families in New York City, as well as outside of the city, in Westchester and Long Island. Next, we have Lakshmi Mahesh, who is a senior attorney at the law offices of Neal Rosenberg in New York. Lakshmi oversees all of the clients located outside of New York City for Neal Rosenberg's office. She litigates against several of the Westchester school districts. She also represents clients at IEP meetings and on disciplinary matters.
Good evening.
Next, in order, we have Meredith Braxton. Meredith is an attorney from SELF's hometown of Greenwich, Connecticut. She's been practicing law for 30 years with a primary focus on special education for the last 18. She runs her own practice here in Greenwich, Connecticut, where she represents parents and students in their efforts to secure an appropriate education. She also practices in New York. And last, but definitely not least, we have Dana Jonson. She's a civil rights attorney with a private practice in Connecticut. She exclusively represents the civil and legal rights of children with disabilities. through the special education process. Dana is also a mother to 6 children, 4 of which have IEPs, and 2 of which are foster care children. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to jump right to the panelists so that you can get the most of this session. And we'll start in order with the first question. What inspired you, or what brought you to the practice of special education law? And if we can start with you, Greg.
So I don't want to sound corny, but it was my mom. And I was always a mama's boy, and my mom was a guidance counselor, and she was passionate about special education, and I would always be fascinated by the stories she would tell. And then I wanted to be a lawyer, and so she and I were talking in college, and she said, why don't you call Regina? And Regina Skyer, who used to carpool me in high school. And so I called Regina, and I started interning in college after my junior year, and I've never left. And I interned there with Lara, and I started on the same day. Lara introduced me to my wife, so I owe a lot to Lara. And I've been there ever since, and I fell in love with what I do in representing kids and families and getting what they need.
Thank you. Lakshmi, would you like to go next? What brought you to the field of special education law? And you have an interesting background, because I left this out earlier, but you started litigating for New York City Department of Education.
That is correct. So I went to law school because I knew I wanted to be an advocate for disenfranchised populations, or populations that needed advocacy. And so out of law school, I became a prosecutor in the Bronx DA's office. I was working in domestic violence, and I was approached by one of my coworkers who had left, who had gone to the Department of Education. And it was presented as this really interesting policy position that we would talk about compliance and bringing the Department of Education up to where they needed to be in this very interesting niche aspect of the law. And, you know, within 6 months of being at the Department of Ed, there was a change in the administration, which is consistent with New York City. And all of a sudden, the role shifted from compliance to litigating. And in my time at the Department of Ed, it was very clear to me that the system, and not just the Department of Education, that districts as a whole tend to be responsive to litigation as opposed to proactive. And the only way, in some instances, to really get the machine or the system to move is through litigation. And so, ironically, when I was on maternity leave with my second child, my current employer, Neal, approached me and said, you know, I know you live in Westchester. We're looking to expand our Westchester practice. I think this would be a really good fit. He was the last case I litigated before I went on maternity leave. And so we found a match, and I have been working for his office ever since.
Thank you. Meredith, you want to go next?
Sure. I was a less direct route to special education law. I started out after law school, after being a magazine editor and then going to law school. I was in big law in New York City, you know, defending corporations in various really unsexy cases. Well, some of them were kind of sexy, but, you know, and I, you know, left there and came out to Connecticut because I started having children. And as they started growing up, I started having issues with a couple of them learning how to read. And so then I started, you know, getting involved in the special education system. And it was really the sort of mom network that led me to really understand what the rights of my children were. And being a lawyer, of course, I started really researching them and got better at advocating for my own kids. Then I started volunteering in the PTA to help other families, you know, advocate for their kids while I was still working as an attorney. And so that's how I started getting into it. And then I went off on my own and started my own firm. And at first it was all business litigation. But people started actually paying me to advocate for their children. And it just took over my practice, and it's my absolute favorite thing to do. I just find it, in comparison to the other areas of law that I've worked in, it's just so rewarding, because when you succeed, it's a big success. It's really meaningful. It's not just that you win some money on a contract, you've made a difference in a kid's life. So, so now that's pretty much all I do. I do other education related claims in federal and state court. And I actually am not really practicing in New York much anymore, pretty much exclusively Connecticut. But that's how I came to it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And Dana, last, what brought you to the practice of special education law?
Mine was, I don't know if it's direct or not, but I was a special education teacher and then an administrator. And I was very frustrated because no one would listen to me. And I was in a system in Boston Public. It was a charter school system. So I was the director, but it was a self-contained within that system. So it was very frustrating. And over a few margaritas one night, the school psychologist said, when I said to her, the only person anyone listens to are the lawyers, and it's driving me crazy. And she goes, and why don't you become a lawyer? And I thought, well, okay. So that's pretty much how that happened. And I went to law school, but the way I became, but I wanted to go to law school to represent boards. And what turned me to parent side advocating was I was fortunate enough to do an internship with Cote and Crabtree and Strong up in Boston. Bob Crabtree and Larry Coten wrote the special ed laws in Boston. And so they are parent side attorneys. And I was fortunate enough to do an internship with them. And I realized that was really where I wanted to be. That I had a lot more control over the cases I would take and how I would handle them if I was on the parent side versus the school district side. So, and I, just like Meredith, I have to say, I love it. Never bored.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, this is amazing to have you all here. All of your backgrounds are extremely impressive. And what's clear is that you all love the work you do. And it comes through in hearing your background. So we'll start with a question about the attorney relationship. And what, I guess we can go in the same order. Greg, what do you find that parents need the most help with when they come to you? And that's a big question. So if you want to pick one thing, or, what's the main problem that parents seem to come in with, and what are they looking to get from their relationship with the special education attorney?
Well, I think overall, what we see everyone's looking for is to make a game plan and to put that game plan into action. And, when you coming into the office, whether it be your child is not achieving, or that your child is in a school that is not performing up to the expectations, or not adhering to the IEP, whatever that is, we need to make a game plan. And I think that's what clients come in with, or potential clients come in with, is they're all over the place and really need to put everything together and need that help in putting everything together and then guiding them through the process and with their legal rights.
Okay. So in some ways you're helping them strategize as well.
Correct. We always say we like to stack the chessboard so we could be close to checkmate.
Got it. Okay. And Lakshmi, what do you find supervising the Westchester area at your office? What do you find is the most common problem parents come to you with?
So I think there's two general things, and this applies to, Westchester families, Long Island families, New York City families, is that, I'm an attorney, I'm not a clinician. And so I can't just wave a magic wand to get the results. It's really, I'm only as good as the clinical support that says, here's where your child is falling apart. What parents, so often parents get stuck in, I know my child can't read, I know my child can't do this. And that is very often the case. However, when you walk into a CSE meeting and there's a special ed teacher and a school psychologist and all of these certifications on the table, you know, you are sort of out credentialed. And so a parent's opinion versus an attorney's opinion versus clinical support is really dispositive of how far you're going to get. Because, you know, I can make all the arguments in the world, but without the data and the information that says he's not making progress or he's reading at a second grade level, even though he's in fifth grade, you know, my arguments are as valid as a Post-it note. And so a lot of these cases really hinge on having the clinical support in place that really articulates the level of need.
So they're coming to you looking for that guidance of where to seek that data, or you direct them to?
I think it depends on the context. Sometimes they have the data and need direction, or sometimes they have the observation of watching their kids struggle and they need to gather more support. You know, when we have families that are saying, look, for 2 years, I have been doing Orton Gillingham tutoring, and I have been paying for dramatic pragmatics, and I have been paying for this, this, and this. Well, you know, the district is claiming the credit for all of that progress. And so we really need to have more comprehensive information to provide to the Committee on Special Education to get the result that we want. I think it's also framing things, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think it's also framing things in the context of need. You know, everyone wants to do what's best for their child. Everyone wants to make sure that they're giving their child, you know, the most opportunity that they can have. And I think you just have to shift the narrative to the committee to say, this is what this child needs. And that has to be substantiated by the data and the clinical information.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. And Meredith, what do you find maybe something that hasn't been touched on, or another problem that you feel is common, especially out in the suburban districts in Connecticut?
It's kind of related to what both Lakshmi and Greg said. And in the magic wand category, you know, special education law is actually a pretty complicated area of law. And it's ironically it's very unparent friendly. So there's very little that's intuitive about it. So most of the time when parents walk in, they know about a friend who got reimbursement for this kind of school, or, you know, that kind of thing. And they think that you can just, you know, bully the school district into it. And it's educating parents about what the process is, how you build a claim if you're trying to get a kid out, or how you convince them, as Lakshmi was saying, that they should give the services that your child needs. You know, most of it is not instant, it's not fast, it's a process that is dictated by the statutes and regulations wherever you are. And so, you know, educating parents about that is a big part of, you know, what parents need. They need to understand what the legal process is and where they are in that process and what we need to do to move that process along to the goal that they have.
Okay. Thank you. And Dana, what do you find to be?
Well, yeah, I find that most parents who call my office, I tend to get a lot of families that are early on in the process. They're often not that close to litigation. And so there's a long way to go, but that they, as Meredith said, don't know the process, and they know something's wrong and they know that they can do something about it, but they're not really sure what. So that's the majority. A lot of times I will get clients from, say, a professional who has recommended them or referred them to me, in which case they already know what the issue is because the professional has told them what the issue is. But typically it's, you know, parents know something's wrong, but they don't know what to do about it, or they don't know how to change it. And as Meredith said, it's not intuitive to parents. It's not parent friendly.
Okay, thank you very much. What is one thing that you all wished or would like people to know before they engage in this relationship with a special education attorney? I mean, I know a lot of parents come to you just ready to talk and desperate and looking for a shoulder to cry on. What is something that you hope clients understand or parents understand before they engage in this relationship with the special ed attorney? And maybe we'll switch it up. Dana, you want to start? We'll go backwards.
Great. You know, I don't know, before they engage, it's hard. I think that a really important thing to remember, sometimes when parents call me, I am the first person they have spoken to who understands them. I'm the first person who has said, yes, that's a problem. Yes, I understand your child's disability. Yes, I know how the school system works. And yes, I can walk you through it. And that connection can mean a lot to parents and can turn somewhat therapeutic. And I think one thing for parents that can be dangerous with their attorneys is to rely on them for that emotional support as well. And it's not that we don't provide emotional support. Of course we do. Many of us have gone through this ourselves. So I have 4 children with IEPs. I got into special ed law first, but jackpot. So I think that it's important for parents to recognize that they need other outlets. They need places where they can talk, whether it's a therapist or a group or a counselor or a parent group. It is really important for them to get that support and that outside place, from that outside place, or I'm not a clinician.
And does anyone else want to add anything? What's one thing you wish that parents knew before coming to you?
I think they should know that they should be as organized as possible, as much of a crisis that they can be in. But if you have already collected the relevant emails, if you have all your IEPs organized, your evaluations organized, and you come to me with that, so that it'll cut down the time, it'll make it more straightforward. I'll be able to review what's going on much quicker and understand what's going on. And also, you shouldn't withhold any information that could be relevant, even if you don't want to disclose it, because it will come out eventually and I'll need to know about it. So, just full information as organized as you can make it.
Okay. And Greg and Lakshmi, do you have anything to add there? What are the important things for a parent to know before they come to meet with you and engage your services?
I mean, I would just suggest don't drink the Kool-Aid. You always have these people who come in who are like, my neighbor got fully reimbursed for this, this, and this. And I think there has to be, you're coming to counsel for counsel, and you're coming to counsel for an honest and meaningful assessment about your specific child and your specific circumstances. And even though the law provides for certain safeguards, what may be appropriate or necessary for a child on the spectrum, or a child who's learning disabled, or a child who's emotionally disturbed, is going to be relevant to where that child is functioning. And special education is highly individual. And even though the law provides for safeguards, depending on the district that you are in, depending on the attorney whose desk your case lands on the other side, your process could go completely different, even with the same set of facts. So I think, to the extent you are seeking counsel, I think you have to go into that conversation seeking a meaningful assessment of the facts of your specific case. We usually give a range of, here's what these districts look like, and here's maybe what you'll get. There's always the outlier. There's always the family that walked away with nothing. There's always the anomaly that walked away with everything. But typically it's somewhere in the middle, and where that middle is really depends on your case.
Thank you. Greg, anything that we missed?
Just adding to that, it's just close your ears. When your friends talk, let it go in one ear and out the other, because that is the worst.
Many times I've had someone come to me and say, so-and-so got this school district to pay full freight for this school. And I'm thinking to myself, that's my client. I know that's not true.
Exactly.
You know, and I can't say that, but
Well, even if you, and even if so-and-so did get that, most districts have non-disclosure agreements. So you're
Right.
not probably getting the
So
full
now your
truth, or
friend
they're
knows.
not
and
supposed to be saying it.
I say that to parents all the time. I said that if somebody is telling you this, they're violating their confidentiality agreement.
Yeah.
So take that with a grain of salt. And I always tell parents, I said, parent groups are amazing. You need that support, you need that camaraderie, but take everything with a grain of salt, because just one little thing. I have seen the same district go after one parent and completely comply with another over the exact same matter. And I can't tell you why. So it just has to be, your case is your case. Yeah.
Okay, that's very helpful. And that all rings true from when I was practicing. So what, when a parent engages a special education attorney, I know it typically starts with an initial consultation. What can a parent expect from that initial consultation with you or someone in your firm? Greg, you want to start off that one? What can a parent, what should a parent expect just out of that initial meeting?
Again, like I said, when I was in the beginning, is that, we like to sit down, discuss your child, tell us the story, tell us what's happening, and we'll make a game plan. If you have evaluations, we'll review them. We'll, tell you where those evaluations should be, who should have those evaluations, when you should engage with your district, how you should engage with your district, and you're going to leave with a bullet point plan. So that's, a consult with us in our office.
Okay. Meredith, you want to tell us about just generally what a family should expect going into that initial consultation, if that's, how you start?
So, usually I talk to somebody on the phone. I try to limit it to like 30 minutes. And I try to get a sense of what the problem is, what they have as a building blocks for dealing with the issue, and sort of make an initial assessment of, can I help you or can't I, So if I feel that I can, I give them sort of a very bare bones, I think this is the direction we can go. And if you want to go in that direction, come on in and we'll do a consultation. Then I need some paper to look at, in order to build the kind of game plan that Greg is talking about. And I think most of us do. I need to see the IEPs. I need to see evaluations. If there's a lot of back and forth in email that's relevant, I need to see that. And then we can assess, do we need any more evaluations? Where are we going? Have they already committed so many procedural violations that you should get your kid out to another school and we just file, So it's, first I try to ascertain whether I can help you. And if I can, then you come in and we analyze everything you have and we come up with a plan for how to get you where you want to go.
Okay.
And it always starts with, what is the result you're looking for? And then we work backward from there.
Got it. And then I'm just going to change the question a little bit for Lakshmi and Dana. Some families have already, maybe started to work with an advocate, or they've done some advocacy either on their own or with an advocate. What can a special education attorney offer them that maybe an advocate could not?
I think it depends. There are some advocates who, it depends on the result, quite frankly, because, if you're looking for something as simple as an up on a speech and language mandate, there are advocates who can do a fabulous job with that. There are advocates that really can step in and help guide a family. However, advocates can't provide legal counsel. And there's sort of a boundary that they need to understand. I think that to the extent that you are dealing with an advocate, you want to approach it in very much the same way that you're dealing with an attorney. You want to know what your costs are going to be and what is the result you're working towards. Because, so often families are sort of blind as to what they can do. And And it's an overwhelming process. And so the hope is sometimes if I bring an attorney or an advocate to this meeting, it's going to help me. And I think doing that without understanding what your result is really doesn't serve your greater interest, because all it does is sort of turn up the temperature with the district. You know, some advocates, some attorneys, and once you retain either one, to some districts, it signals, okay, this is now an adversarial relationship. And in the bigger picture, again, in context, case by case, depending on the outcome you want, in the bigger picture, the more that you can work towards a collaborative relationship with your district, it will serve your bigger picture interest in terms of getting your child the education they need.
Yeah, and that is a scenario I can definitely relate to see the district's response to whether you're an advocate or an attorney can be amazing at times. And Dana, you, I know, do a lot of advocacy in your litigation practice. Can you,
Right.
you know, what though can you offer a family that perhaps an advocate could not,
Well,
or where should they engage
yeah,
with?
it's interesting because we just took on an advocate. So I just brought an advocate into my office to help with a lot of that advocacy component. And, you know, she offers advocacy separate from legal services. So I'm not necessarily involved in any of her matters. You know, I could be if it was one of mine, but I'm not. So for us, how we sort of define it is, you know, she doesn't give any legal advice or, you know, handle any legal components, but in our office, she's great at helping parents strategize how to prepare for meetings, how to attend those meetings either by themselves or with her, because she can attend and help make sure things stay on track. You know, working through IEPs, understanding the goals and objectives, looking through progress or lack thereof. There are a lot of pieces that we do too, because we have to in order to build our case. We have to do a lot of that. But if parents don't need an attorney, they just need those components, then that's a great way for a parent to go. The issue I think that parents sometimes run into is, and I feel it's important to say, advocates are not regulated. So my husband could go out and put up a sign and say, I've been living with her for 20 years, so I'm an advocate. I'm a special ed advocate right now. And we're lucky in Connecticut. We have a lot of really great advocates in Connecticut. And so we are a very lucky state that way. But that is something for parents to keep in mind. And I do tell parents to talk to advocates and find out what their background is. What is the training that they did? There are some very good trainings out there. COPA has one, for example, SEAT for special education advocacy training. And so find out what their training is and find out what their niche is. Because if somebody got into it because of a reading issue, maybe they've only handled reading cases, and that might be different. So, you know, I think that there's a lot of benefits to advocates, I think, for parents. It really can help them be emotional about their child while someone else is helping them keep organized with all the paperwork and documentation and all of that. To have somebody else to help you do all of that can be incredibly helpful. That's not what I do. I'm working your case, I'm setting it up, I'm, you know, dealing with the other attorney or the school district in some capacity. So, you know, it really depends on what you need.
Yeah. So like Meredith said, it's like looking at the outcome, the desired outcome first is always very important.
And I think there are some cases where I feel like the school district is very busy committing procedural violations and messing up, and where the you know, goal is to do an outplacement. It's sometimes helpful to have an advocate work with you so that when they go to the IEP meeting, the school district doesn't bring their attorney, and you can kind of lay some landmines for them to step into, which they often happily do if their attorney isn't there to bring them back. So there's a little bit of strategizing too. If there, you know, there are several really great lay advocates I like to work with. And there are just sometimes when it's the more appropriate thing to do. Also, when you just don't want it to get that adversarial yet, you know, and you don't want the board attorney to get in there yet, then, you know, you should definitely consider a lay advocate.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point, Meredith. If I have something where I'm like, you know what, you might be able to get this done on your own, that's when an advocate would be great, because then they can help them go through that piece of the process on their own and make sure it was done right, so that if it works, great. And if it doesn't, it's set up and prepared
And
for me.
it's ready for me.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're all so amazing, and I know I'm biased, but there's so many wonderful special education attorneys. How does a family, find the right match for them? Obviously, a lot of people come word of mouth, based on location. But what are some other good ways for a parent to find the right special education attorney for them, and their school district and their situation? Lakshmi, do you want to start this one?
Sure. I think there's resources in terms of obviously SEPTA groups. There's resources in terms of groups like this. I think what is important is to have a clear understanding of, one, the outcome that you're looking for, whether it's an achievable outcome, whether you feel that there's a good fit between you and that attorney. And I think a realistic expectation, both in terms of time frame and more so in terms of cost. I've had situations where clients come to me after the fact and say, this has spiraled out of control, X, Y, and Z has happened, and not feeling like they had communication or collaboration from the outset. And I think it's important to set parameters, both in terms of your expectation and what you're looking for, and then understanding what is realistic and what that attorney can provide. So I think you're setting expectations both ways, and it's helpful to have a meaningful understanding of the outcome.
And I know just from when I was practicing and from speaking to friends that very often parents will meet with more than one special education attorney until they find that right fit. So Greg, do you want to chime in on what's, something a parent should keep in mind, or what influences their choice in which special education attorney?
I think meshing well together and really seeing, is this person going to be good for me? There are some parents who need a lot of hand holding, and there are some parents who need a real kick in the tush. And so you want to have an attorney who's either going to hold your hand or kick you in the butt. And sometimes, there are different attorneys who have those different, I think, demeanors. And I think meshing well with the client is fundamentally one of the biggest things. And then I think Lakshmi hit the nail on the head. It's all about communication and expectation.
Okay.
I think one of the things that one question I get sometimes that I think is a good one is about whether I have relationships in that district and with that outside counsel. Because if you get way up into upstate Connecticut, I probably have very little in the way of relationships there. But down here in Fairfield County, I have relationships with the outside counsel for the various school districts, and I know who the various administrators are. I know who the cast of characters are. I mean, that's not dispositive, but it can be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a good question to ask.
I think that, yeah, and that's also, I mean, that's definitely true. And I sometimes tell parents, if you go to one attorney, they may not have a good relationship with that district. And if I have a district that I'm not, I will tell parents, I find that district incredibly difficult. And I may not be the only one, but, I think that's definitely a concern. I often tell parents also, I send them to organizations that have directories. So something like the Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates, COPA.org, they have a list of providers and attorneys and advocates who are members of that organization. And I know that I think Rights Law has like kids yellow pages or something. And so, there are organizations like that that will have names that you can go to and find out. But the other piece is, I think that this is really personal for parents. This isn't about, I need you to read a contract and I don't care who you are. Parents are going to have to talk to me a lot, and they're going to have to trust me. And it's about their child. So if they don't like me, or for any reason don't trust me, it's just not going to work. And I've had that happen where parents have hired me because somebody told them they had to hire me, but they weren't crazy about me. Just, our personalities maybe didn't mesh, and it can never gel that way. So, I think you really do have to have that connection, and the parent really has to feel like they trust you. They don't have to like you, but they do have to trust you.
So here's, we're just about halfway through, a little more. One question maybe to spice things up a little, but on the same topic of that attorney-client relationship. An attorney-client relationship is a relationship, and like any relationship, it can go badly or need to be terminated or go sour. And I'm sure you've been in positions where you've had to terminate a relationship, or the client has terminated that relationship with you. What would you say is the single biggest factor that causes an attorney-client relationship to sour? Who wants to start that one?
I'll do it. Communication. I think there's the lack of communication. It really is the downfall of the relationship. And when you don't have that, even, clients, earlier in my career when I was newer and didn't, know the lay of the land as much. And, I was remiss in not telling clients when there wasn't anything to tell them. Now I know that keeping in contact and keeping in communication is key, is fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Anyone else want to take a bite at that one? What's something that can cause that relationship to go maybe not sour, but not ideal?
I mean, also,
oh, sorry,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if expectations aren't properly set.
Right.
I think for me, sometimes if a parent doesn't see the value that I've brought to the matter, because maybe I've gotten all these things, but in their head, they didn't want the English teacher. They wanted the classroom change. So no matter what I did over here, that's not going to happen. So they're not going to be happy. And I think making sure that parents fully understand, and that's hard to do, and that's on us. And it is a hard thing to do. But I think sometimes when parents don't fully grasp what we're doing or understand the benefit, that can be problematic. And I've also found that sometimes parents just need a change. I don't get offended. If a parent needs somebody else, then they need somebody else. And, that's okay. Sometimes if I've been working with someone for years, maybe they just want to, after like a bunch of years, sometimes you just change a hairstylist because you want something new, right? So, it's going to happen to your attorney too.
I mean, I like what Greg says. I think it's often a mismatch between expectations and, how the process plays out. But I think one of the most important things is when that relationship, if that relationship does fall apart, that it comes apart on good terms,
Yeah.
that from the attorney's perspective, you make sure they get all their files, you make sure that you convey that you are open to talk to their new counsel and bring them up to speed and whatever they need, so that, because ultimately it's about that client's child, and you don't want to do anything to injure what happens there. So, if that does happen, I think it's really important for everybody to make an effort to make that transition a smooth one.
Well, it's important for parents too, because if a parent
Did she freeze?
Yeah,
I think so.
Done. So Dana, we can't hear you right now. You're frozen. We'll turn to Lakshmi maybe while we figure out what's going on with Dana's screen, but we can't, you're frozen. You might want to zoom in and out, or
So
you want to add Lakshmi?
yeah, I mean, I think there's no way to frame this without it coming across badly. But I think we live in this world now where everybody's working remotely and everybody has an iPhone, and an email is still viewed as sort of almost a text message. And I think part of the places that relationships sour is when there's this expectation for instantaneous response or instantaneous answers. And I think there also has to be management in terms of the client's expectation. You know, for example, if I'm in a hearing or I'm having dinner with my family, you know, you will get a response. You are entitled to a response in a timely manner. You are entitled to have clear information about the status of your case and what is happening in your case, and that is important. But there also has to be sort of a respect and boundaries in terms of understanding that, you know, school districts are open generally 8 to 4. There is no fire or emergency that is happening at Sunday night at 6 o'clock that you need to have me.
Right.
And so it's really
you also have to tell yourself not to check on those messages, I'm sure.
Right, because we're all in this world of everything pushed in all the time. And so I think it's not taking offense to understanding that it is a law practice that you are retaining. And I think that helps in terms of managing both parties' expectations.
Dana, we can see you again if you want to add something.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you wanted me to stop talking, just tell me.
I guess we'll move on. There are some school districts and also, you know, some committees of special education within New York City that are easier for parents to work with than others. What would you say is the single biggest influencer of that? So in other words, what's the biggest factor affecting a district's willingness to work with a family?
I mean, no one wants to hear this answer, and some of it's personality. You know, unfortunately, you will get some of the most difficult chairpersons or school psychologists sitting at the table. And, you know, it sometimes that's oil and water, and it's not going to get you anywhere. But sometimes, depending on the personality you get and the information you have, those two may connect and you may get the machine to work. I think fundamentally, you can't control all the variables. You know, you can't control whose desk you land on. And that's a frustrating thing to hear, and a frustrating thing for parents who are trying to advocate for their child. And so I think at the baseline, you focus on the variables you can control. And the variables you can control is having your documentation, having your clinical support, having your clinicians dial into the meeting, so that if there is this gregarious or abrasive or awful personality that you know you're going up against, at minimum, you're prepared for the next step. You know, the saying goes, you pray for peace, but you prepare for war. That doesn't mean you walk into your meetings for a fight. You walk into your meetings being prepared to effectively advocate for what it is your child needs. And that doesn't mean, you know, sort of taking the bait on certain personalities. And you know, I think one of the other factors is money. You know, once you go into the suburbs, some districts, you know, that you're dealing with just have more resources than others and will throw things at you. And that's unfortunate, but it's a practical reality.
And Meredith, thank you. Meredith, do you want to touch on that? You probably see a lot of different districts in Connecticut.
Well, I agree with Lakshmi about, you know, whoever's at the table, you know, the personalities of the people at the table make a difference. But I think that in many cases, the tone and, you know, the sort of tactics of the administrators who you're going to be facing is dictated by the special education director for that school district. In some school districts, you know, they do work toward working with parents more effectively. In others, you know, it's they've clearly, trained their administrators to say no in as many ways as they can say no. So, you know, it's like a combination of those things. You know, where are you? What is the sort of general philosophy of that special education director, and what have you been able to glean about her or his, guidelines to the administrators? And then who do you have at that table, and what do you know about how they usually operate. So.
Okay, and thank you. Greg, I'm going to ask you something a little bit different because I know you have a lot of experience in New York City, which is kind of an entity in its own, or its own beast. How do the non-city school districts, based on what you've seen, because I know you're also in some of the suburban districts, Westchester, Long Island, how do those non-city districts differ in their approach to your efforts as compared to, or what's the biggest difference you see between the city school districts and the suburban school districts through your work?
So how much time do you have?
I know, but maybe a couple minutes.
Apples and oranges. It's really crazy. And I think the biggest difference is it's personal in the suburbs. In New York City, you have 1.1 million kids, 200,000 students with IEPs. There's no personality to it, where, you know, they're not doing what they need to do. As Lakshmi said, she was hired to be in compliance, and that fell to you know where. And so we're seeing it's more substantive in the suburbs and more procedural in New York City, because again, it's just the volume, the money, and that's another big difference, as Lakshmi said, is the money in the suburbs. But I think that, you know, and also in New York City, by and large, many cases, many of the CSEs don't have attorneys who are litigating these cases. They throw in school psychologists or special ed teachers who, it's honestly, it's not a fair fight. And it's great for us.
And also, yeah, no, I just remember, Greg, what about just the type of law that you practice primarily in New York City? I remember when we used to go to COPA conferences in New York City, and, you know, a big part of our work was reimbursement.
Absolutely.
Suing for reimbursement for these private schools. And then we would go to these COPA conferences when we could travel and be with people from all over the country, and they would be fighting for inclusion. And we were surprised to hear that they wanted to be in the schools in these cases, and curious that they had good programs. So do you want to speak to that a little?
No, I think that's really the biggest difference, is that in New York City, most of the work that we're doing is seeking tuition reimbursement or funding for some sort of private school, where in the suburban districts, yes, there are those cases, but we are by and large working with the school districts to try to come up with a plan that is most appropriate for that child. So that's a significant difference in the way in which the cases are approached in the suburbs versus New York City.
You know, when I did do some Westchester cases, I felt like the administrators there were more competent and understood IDEA procedure far better than the Connecticut administrators. Is that still true?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think you have to know that in the suburbs, so to touch on what Greg said, New York City, very often there's no attorney involved. On the flip side, in the suburbs, very often the chairperson, the director of special education, has been briefed and knows what their talking points are. And there are certain districts that I can promise you that before you've even come in for a consultation with me, you are on the district's counsel's radar. He's probably read the IEP before it's been finalized, or he may have conferenced or had a conversation with the director of special education regarding the matter. Districts take compliance seriously and regularly speak to their attorneys anytime there's an instance. So I think you have to assume that even though you may just be looking for counsel, the district is well versed in terms of what their obligations are.
Dana, we know that you have a special education law podcast that comes out on Wednesdays. What prompted you to start that podcast? And what topics do you talk about?
That's funny. I have a podcast, Need to Know with Dana Jonson. There's no H in Johnson, which makes it confusing and not easy to find. And I didn't think that through earlier, but it's Need to Know with Dana Jonson. And I my goal was really to get information out to parents. I love presenting. I love talking to parents. I do it anytime I can. And I've always said, if I could, my goal in life is that no parent walks into an IEP meeting unprepared, and that they know what they're doing. And I think all of us who practice in this field, we all feel the same way. And that's why we all donate so much of our time to educating parents. And, podcasts were getting popular, and I was trying to think of, another way that I can help parents out. And this sort of worked. What I do is sometimes I talk about the law. I have a lot of other professionals on to talk about whether it's disability specific or interventions. The one I did that published yesterday is about body activated learning. And, before school started, I did one on least restrictive environment. So, I kind of am all over the place, but it's really, I also listen to parents. I have a Facebook page that follows it. And if parents reach out to me and they say, this is what's really a burning issue, then I look into it and I find somebody to talk to about it. It's fun.
Thank you. So just maybe one or two you want to answer this question. We were just wondering, who are some of your favorite school districts to work with, and likewise, your least favorite, if you feel comfortable sharing with us. Or we could skip that question.
Yeah, I wouldn't say specifically, but one thing I would say is that I think that the tone that I get from a school district is often reflected by the attorney they have. And there's in Connecticut only a handful of board side attorneys who handle most of the school districts in Connecticut. And while we all have our own personal working relationships with each of them, some are notoriously more difficult than others. And when those attorneys land in a school district, that school district becomes more difficult too. So that's been my experience.
Well, for example, Stanford used to be fairly good to work with.
They were great.
They're awful. They're awful.
They switched attorneys and we can't get anything done. We
And
can't get anything done.
Are you able to comment on which firms are more difficult to work with, or you rather not?
Well, I think that because my working
relationship. Go for it.
I think that, I feel like I have a good working relationship with most of the attorneys I work with. I do. And so I don't want to, don't want to ruin that.
Right. So you can just tell us in general, what firms out there?
I will say in general, I find Shipman and Goodwin attorneys the easier ones to work with.
Just the firms. Okay.
Well,
I think it's also
most of those attorneys.
Pullman too.
Pullman?
I think in terms,
yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I think in terms of just focusing on the Westchester and Long Island.
Sorry, someone just said they could not hear the names you said of the law firms that can be good to work with.
So there's Shipman and Goodwin, and then there's Pullman and Coleman.
Okay, and I think we're giving it to you in the chat for those who wanted that. Okay. So now everybody's favorite topic, not to sound like a broken record, but we are in the middle of a global pandemic. What have been some challenges that you've seen? How has this changed your practice? What are you seeing? Is that affecting the relationship you have with your clients? Really, just curious, to hear from you, different attorneys practicing in different areas, how you're dealing with the COVID pandemic and your clients.
Keeping us on our toes at the very
least. We did such a good job of getting through our questions, and everybody, you guys have just been awesome. But I mean, I know with COVID, one thing we've been stressing through Special Education Legal Fund is that the gap is becoming so much bigger between the haves and the have-nots. And it's really we all know, all of us with kids know how hard it is to just get through the day. Every morning you're signing on to 10 apps before you even go out the door, taking, 3 temperatures. What do you find your clients are struggling with? Have their cases been affected? Are you still able to have certain meetings?
You should be able to have any meeting you need to. Everybody's doing everything virtually, and Connecticut was ridiculous telling school districts that they were okay not doing PBTs. But I feel the biggest issue for me is the level of uncertainty that has been introduced, because, you know, it is a unique time. You know, school districts are supposed to be implementing IEPs to the greatest extent possible, but what does that mean? You know, and how is that going to be interpreted by a hearing officer or a school district, you know, special education director? So it makes it harder to counsel our clients about what we can expect as an outcome, you know, about this period of time when remote learning is part of the mix. You know, and some cases are starting to percolate through, not really through Connecticut. We haven't seen too much in Connecticut, but through some other jurisdictions, there are some cases coming through. I think most of them adhere to the federal guidance, you know, rather than the Connecticut Bureau of Special Education guidance.
Yeah. The
So
magical guidance.
Yeah, so it's just, you know, school district special education directors are taking advantage of it to, you know, say, you know, we don't have to do this because it's not possible, or it's not whatever easy. And it's just, we don't have any solid piece of legal authority to seize on to push back at them. And so it's going to percolate through, and we're going to get some, you know, precedent and some authority at some point. But
And we've already got some good stuff has already come out, right, Meredith? Some good stuff has already come out. So we're cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, but it's just, it's been challenging because, you know, this is really a work in progress. So.
We do have some questions coming in, so unless someone feels strongly about adding to the COVID question, I can go on. So what are there good certain school districts, especially now, you know, people moving out of the city or people moving within the city, what are there certain school districts that you feel are easier to work with? And if so, can you share some of the some of the audience, or someone asked, what are the good school districts?
What I normally tell parents is that it depends. You know, I'm sorry, but it depends. It depends on your child. You know, if you have a child where you desperately want them included, then you want to go to a district that has a really strong program and supports for your child and their disability. And if you're looking for, you know, sometimes parents looking for an out of district program, they want to go to a district that maybe recognizes when they don't have a proper program, which is becoming harder and harder to find. But I usually say to parents, think of it this way. If you get in, I only talk to parents who are in a fight with their district, and that is not the majority of parents. So the way I look at it is look at the schools and see if they have what you want or you think you need. But if you're going to get into a fight with your school, what kind of district do you live in? Do you live in a district represented by one of these firms that we're talking about, or do you live in a district that notoriously fights parents for the sake of fighting them? And that should be more important, I think, than looking at, you know, whether they have this specific, whatever it is, service.
Yeah, that's good advice, because the programs can also change from year to year. There's always one parent is someone's wondering if there's an attorney in Dutchess County. Does anyone have any recommendations, or who practices in that area, or where can a family look? Looking for an attorney in Dutchess County in special education. Are there resources online where parents can look for these attorneys?
Just
The
mimicking what
Council of
Dana said.
Advocates and Attorneys has a directory.
What's that?
The Council of Advocates and Attorneys, COPA,
Okay.
they have a directory of them.
Okay.
And that link is in the chat. If you scroll up, the link to COPA, it's copaa.org. And they have a directory, and that will help you find somebody.
Okay.
I just want to go back to the question of school districts that are good to work with. I think there's a couple of factors, which is some of it is relevant to the board. Some of it is because the board dictates the policy and the board dictates the mandate of the special ed director. The board hires the attorney, and for some attorneys, you already know out the gate that they are more litigious, and that signals to you that the board may be more litigious, but not necessarily. But I think to also frame it and to help parents sort of navigate the system, when dealing with any government agency and there's a major screw up, it either happens either because of malfeasance or incompetence. And for parents, this is deeply personal. This is your child. And so it is such an easy knee-jerk reaction to assume that it is automatically malfeasance and they have it out for you. And very often it is less malfeasance and more just incompetence. And so when we talk about good district, bad district, some of it is, yes, you have to make an educated guess about the level of need that your child has. And I would encourage you that before you move into a district, you make an appointment to speak to the special ed director. You have a conversation with them to see what programs are in the district. You look at the website, you look at the programs that are in district, look at the board meeting, the budget meeting, all of that stuff that is subject, that's public information. You definitely won't be able to visit a school at this point. And even before the pandemic, you weren't visiting special ed classrooms because that's a privacy violation. But the best way to make an educated decision is to have a meaningful assessment from the resources you trust. Your psychiatrist, your psychologist, your speech and language pathologist, the people that you trust to help guide you in your child's education are the people that should help guide you in terms of making a decision as to whether or not this is the right school or the right district or the right place for your child.
Thank you guys so much. I'm sure everybody is getting tired and needs to get back to their families and whatnot. We'll just have one final question to pick your legal brains one last time. But what do you all think? As you know, a lot of children are not getting the services on their IEP that they're entitled to due to the pandemic. What is your prediction, or what are your thoughts on whether or not there might be compensatory services or some relief available to these families of the many students who we know are not getting the services on their IEP because of the pandemic?
They should absolutely be looking for compensatory education. It exists, it's real. Some school districts aren't sure about that right now,
So
but
what
100%.
can they do? What can these families do now?
They need to be document every service that was skipped and every service that was not accessible. So just because it was provided does not mean that your child benefited from it in any way, shape, or form. And compare that against your IEP, not just your IEP implementation plan. In Connecticut, that's what districts are giving out. And those, we're gonna need a whole other hour if we're gonna start talking about implementation plans. But, look at your IEP and see what is and is not being put in. Document. Do not let anything go, and be as specific as you can, because you need to be and then you need to bring that to your school district and to your team and say, how are we going to make up these hours? How are we going to do that? And compensatory education is not just the missed hours one-to-one. Compensatory education is to bring the child back up to where they would have been had they received the services at the time that they did. So if a parent is running into difficulty with that, I would suggest calling an attorney sooner rather than later. Sorry, compensatory just gets me all fired up. I didn't mean to take over. It gets me all fired up.
And and there are school districts like, Greenwich won't even discuss compensatory education. Mary Ford's just like, there's no such thing. For the period of COVID, I waved a magic wand and I don't owe anybody any services.
Anything, for any reason.
And
so you're saying you shouldn't necessarily take that as parents don't need to take that as the rule.
No, it is not the rule.
It's not true. It's not accurate.
What about in the city, Greg? How are you seeing where should our families who are missing out on services?
Absolutely. Same thing. Document, document, document. If you're not getting them or if they're not accessible, absolutely entitled to seek compensatory educational.
And Lakshmi, do you want to add one last thing before we sign off for the evening? And thank you again so much. This has been so much fun, and I hope that everybody else found it very helpful. I know I've learned some new things just this evening. So Lakshmi, do you want to end for us?
I just think that some of the compensatory education piece is going to shake out not only during this school year, but more so going into next year, depending on the outcome of the pandemic. Quite frankly, depending on the outcome in terms of federal funding, because districts across the board are hemorrhaging money, both in terms of needing to make accommodations pursuant to the pandemic, as well as being strapped by their tax base, as well as being strapped by federal funding. And nobody wants to hear that, you know, their child sort of in limbo based upon it. But I also think that the practical reality is that we're not going to have a meaningful assessment of how wide that gap is this year, because we're going to run through the school year and there's so many uncontrollable variables and so many unknowns that I think you're best served to, one, keep the line of communications with your district open, arm yourself with clinicians outside of your district that you trust that will advise you, and don't hesitate to reach out to an attorney to get information and know your rights.
And in case the point was not emphasized enough, document, 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 document. If it is not recorded or it is not in writing, it didn't happen.
So email.
Period.
So like if you have an oral conversation with somebody on your child's team and they say something important about what's going on, get to your email, say, I just want to confirm what you told me in our conversation, blah, 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 blah. Let me know if I misunderstood anything, you know, and then you have a paper trail for that communication.
All right, well, I just want to thank you all so much. Thank you, panelists, for making yourselves available and sharing your insight and your experience with us. Obviously, you're each inspiring in your own way, and I know that we're already getting feedback that this was super helpful to our families watching. So thank you so much, and thank you for those of you who joined us tonight. We know there are probably a few more exciting things you could be doing, and so we really appreciate you signing in.
Thank you, Self, for the good work that you're doing,
Yeah,
and have a good night, everyone.
yeah, stay safe,
Thank you to
everybody.
Self.
Okay, bye.